So the Utah Jazz are 7-6 right now. And if you were bigging them up to be potentially the second or third best team in the West, which I pretty much was, then you may think that the beginning of the season has been disappointing. I mean, in a sense, yeah, but I think in another way you can look at it and say a couple of weird things have happened with this Jazz team. Number one, they lost the game to the Warriors off of that last-second Jerebko tip-in. They lost to the T-Wolves when Derrick Rose dropped 50 points and made a bunch of three-pointers. They lost to the Grizzlies when they didn't have Donovan Mitchell, and then the very next night they had Mitchell back, but then they had basically a schedule loss because they had to go to Denver and play that night, and going to Denver is already a difficult game. Now, these are not excuses. There are still things that I think are interesting in terms of, like, is Crowder better next to Gobert? Is Favors better next to Gobert? Also, why is the defense just now really getting it together in like the last 3 games? Also, what's up with Donovan Mitchell's percentages? There are some things to talk about. But the first thing I want to point out, if we can start with this like on a kind of positive note, is that the Jazz offense is way better than last season. And I don't think it's because of one specific thing. I think it's a combination of a few things. Number one, Rudy is just a better rebounder. He's grabbing a few more offensive rebounds a game, which is leading to him averaging 16 points at the moment. He's also getting a few more free throw attempts a game. Still a okay, not great free throw shooter at around 60 to 65%. They are shooting a few more three-pointers a game. It's not drastic, but it's at least a little bit more. They're also averaging about 1 less second per possession, which speeds the pace up just a little bit for them. Now, whether that's a thing long-term or not, I don't totally know, because you might be playing with fire on that one with Rudy, because giving Rudy as much time as possible to get up and down the floor and just get to the paint so he can protect the rim, that may end up being better for you, but if the team could still play a little bit faster while still allowing him to do that, if you can manage that correctly, then I think you could be better off for it, but it still might be a little too much of a risk. We'll have to see. I think Joe Ingles has also just been getting a few more opportunities a game just to be a little bit more aggressive, where maybe he'll go off the dribble more than he did in the past, or he'll get an extra pick and roll or an extra handoff play or whatever. So they've managed to add little wrinkles while still being the Jazz, where they do all the off-ball Quinn Snyder stuff. Although they are averaging a few less passes per game this year. But what's so crazy is how they've been good offensively, even with Donovan Mitchell having a tough time. And really, I don't think it's too difficult to see why Donovan's percentages are so rough, because he's averaging about 6 shots a game from like floater range to around 16 feet or so. And he's not making those shots at all right now. He's really quick to shoot some long twos. He's pretty quick to just like get to the paint and then, like I said, just throw up a floater. And also, the game against the Grizzlies not long ago, there were a couple times when he just drove into contested layups. The one I specifically remember was like Jaren Jackson, who's already a damn good defender, by the way. Jaren Jackson was there in position. Mitchell just went into his chest, and I don't know if he was looking for a foul or whatever, but just really had no chance of going in pretty much. So I would hope that Mitchell either starts making those shots or just stops shooting them, and maybe they turn into a couple of extra threes a game. He already takes quite a few threes, so maybe you don't need that, but if anything, just keeping the dribble alive and passing off to somebody, or just going a little harder into a defender to like pretty much guarantee that you get a foul. The other thing is his three-point shooting, though. So I have not watched every Jazz game, but based on what I have seen, on top of some numbers that I've looked at, I think the threes just aren't going in. But I think he's taking shots that are makeable. Like, you look at his dashboard of open shots versus defenders who are like right on top of him, catch and shoots. Like, it just seems like he's taking all the right types of threes. You know, the occasional one off the pick and roll, but even then the spacing isn't bad. and he's just not making them in. Now, is it possible that Donovan Mitchell is just not that great of a shooter? I mean, I don't want to say that because I've seen the dude make some tough shots, and his form is pretty good, and he's a very good free throw shooter, so all that would suggest he can make threes, but for whatever reason, I mean, last season, 34%, and I know he looked really good at stretches, but overall it is still 34%, and then, up to this point, not so hot. Of course, he's also been in and out of the lineup with injuries, which doesn't help him out. I'm not panicking on that one, but I guess it's a thing we can at least pay a little bit more attention to. Other things with offense, speaking of threes, Derek Favors is shooting some threes. All of them have been in the corner, and the last couple of games, Favors has made at least one. And I think the biggest thing is just his willingness to stand out there. I think that opens up the offense so much more, because if you look at the last 5 or 6 games, the lineups with Mitchell, Gobert, and Favors have all been excellent, whereas to start the season they weren't so good, and maybe that was just because Favors was not totally comfortable with standing out there. And the lineups with Crowder have actually regressed a little bit. Not too much, they're still positives, but you would think that the spacing would just be worlds better with Crowder over Favors, and I mean it still is, because Crowder's content with just standing out there all the time, whereas Favors is still going to creep in there every now and then. But even so, the spacing seems to be good enough, so that is good. Now, as far as why the defense has not been amazing out of the jump, I mean, Rudy already said it for one. He said the team is adjusting to the new rules where, what's the technical name for it? I don't know, but it's basically you can't make as much contact on guys moving off the ball, and the Jazz are reliant on being physical because it's not like they're a super athletic team, right? But besides that, I also think, going back to their schedule a little bit, they got blown out by the Raptors, which, I mean, Toronto's been so good out of the jump, I'm not even going to freak out about that one, really. They gave up 120-something points to the Warriors. I don't care how good you are defensively, that's always possible. And then they had that bad schedule loss to the Nuggets. So it's I'm not going that nuts. And even then, the last couple of games, they have improved a bit. Now, as far as why it wasn't great out of the jump, well, I think, number one, you go back to the physical defense thing. Their turnover percentage, or forced turnovers, were a little down to start the year, which could be a direct thing because of that. Also, teams are just spacing the floor out so much nowadays, and that pulls Rudy away from the paint just a little bit more, and that's always something they've got to manage. Yeah, if it sounds like I'm not going into too much detail about their defense, it's because I'm really not that concerned. I mean, hell, if you look at some of the shots that they're making teams shoot, it's all the right things, teams are taking a lot of mid-rangers on them, they just happen to be making a decent amount of them. It's whatever. I think the pendulum is going to swing back to what it should be, which is them being a great defense. To give you an example, and all this is on NBA.com, by the way, the particular thing I'm looking at is, this is a mouthful, teams opponent shooting overall / opponent shooting. Basically, the Jazz are about middle of the league in terms of allowing 14.5 mid-range jump shots a game, okay? However, they are 6th worst in the league, with teams shooting 44% on them, on those shots. So it's I don't know, it's just weird. Just give it a larger sample size and they should be alright. So yeah, that's my take on the Jazz. I think they'll be fine. That's really all I got.